Welcome to The Happening, which interestingly is actually the same name of an M. Night Shyamalan horror movie. But this is all about connecting innovators. And I found that out as I was like, this sounds so familiar. This Happening is all about connecting innovators across the globe. It's the first ever global kind of Thursday gathering. And the really interesting thing about this particular day is we would have been, all the venture cafes would have had our global conference or convening just about this time, but Rona had other plans. And so instead of doing a conference for just our internal crew, we thought the best way to really elevate and celebrate our work is for us all to come together and create the first ever fully online virtual gathering across the world, which kicked off at about 2 a.m. Eastern and will conclude about 9 p.m. Eastern. I will tell you, I did not stay up for that entire time. So this session is all about my favorite topic, equity. And I'm wearing my appropriate Venture Cafe t-shirt that says raise the bar, because that's what I think equity is all about. It's about raising the bar so everybody is at the same place, irrespective of your starting position. And I'm really excited to have a great roundtable of representatives from a variety of ecosystems from the Venture Cafe network. And so as I say your name, although it's kind of clear from your title, just wave your hand, and then we'll kick it off with our intro question. So we have Faye Horwitt, who is president of Forward City. Very familiar with these, have collaborated with them in Miami, spoke at their conference in Durham, big fan of their Abide model around how ecosystem builders can be inclusive. We have Temante Leary, who's a member of Black Innovation Alliance and co-founder of Black Men Talk Tech, and a real advocate, not just in South Florida, but nationally for inclusive innovation in the technology space for folks of color. Then we have Rende, who's the Assistant Director of Career Services at Harvard. Super excited to dive in all about equitable opportunities and what that looks like from an institutional perspective. We've got Liz Brown of Launch Lane at the University Science Center in Philly, loving the t-shirt, Black CEOs matter. We need more of them. We need to pay them more, and we need to invest in them more. So really excited to hear your perspective. And then finally, our dear collaborator and partner, we've got Cari Perez, who is the chapter director for Miami at Techqueria, but also is kind of our general assembly guru for South Florida, doing all things equality and opportunity in tech. So let's give a virtual round of applause. If you are here, light up in the chat or let us know that you're excited to hear this conversation. But I want to start off with an intro question. And so a lot of these conversations in this moment have been focused on how do we fix a problem, or how do we just generate a solution, instead of, perhaps from my perspective, leading with the lens of equity and inclusion, and then looking at the challenge through a lens versus just saying, okay, give me a solution. How much do I need to pay you for it? So how about you all introduce yourselves by explaining, how does your work advance equity and inclusion as it relates to the entrepreneurial and innovation community? I'm going to start off with Cari.
All right, big shoes to fill with Leanne going right after her, but thank you for having me here today. How do I solve equity? Wow, I try to anyways, but I wear two hats most of the time, as Leanne said. The very first one, and the one I'm here today, is Techqueria, which is the largest serving organization, nonprofit for Latinx in tech. We are an organization that started in 2015 in San Francisco, Palo Alto, and New York, both parallel. And they launched because, completely opposite to Miami, nobody at the table was of Latinx or first generation descent. No managers were from Latin America or even Spanish descent. There wasn't support, resources. We didn't even have mentorship programs. And so the very first thing we do as Techqueria is, now that we are in over 15 cities across the US, is bringing together the community and community organizing and lobbying for programs that allow Latinx to grow within managerial positions, leadership positions, get funds, get the money, invest in them. And that's what we're doing. We've kind of officially launched the chapter in Miami, but I am excited to represent here the Techqueria, the work that they've been doing. And most recently, we've kind of we've joined forces with Dreamers in Tech, which is an organization that's 100% supporting undocumented immigrants and DACA dreamers and how they can advance their careers in tech. And so we've always had this soft stance on dreamers and DACA, but since last month, we are officially saying no to ICE. And so that is also a way for us to continue to advance equity in technology. And I'll be quick on my second hat, which I wear most of the time actually, which is General Assembly. One of the largest, if not the largest, tech education companies in the world, in the US. We do coding, UX design, data science, digital marketing training. We reskill people that maybe didn't have an opportunity to study tech. They didn't learn computer science in college. Maybe they just hated their job and now they want to enter tech. And it's sad, only 5% of our students are from Latinx descent, or maybe first generation Latinx. Our community, our African American community, is a little bit larger, but I can't say that we are really truly an equitable organization just yet, even though DEI is at our core and we've got a VP of DEI. And so right now I am the first of our leaders to run workshops and courses in Spanish. And I have just been granted access from the executive board to build our marketing and communication strategy in Spanish as well. And so thinking about equality and equity and access and diversity, it's about language and communication. And obviously bringing that money so that people can study our courses and have better opportunities, because we are expensive. You've got to pay for your education. And so where's the money? I'm trying to find it and I'm trying to give it away. That's what I do.
I love it, Cari. And one of the things that I want to take away before we shift over to Liz is this idea that equity and inclusion are a marathon, not a sprint. It's got to be strategic, it's got to be thoughtful, and it also has to be thinking more broadly about who you serve, including the intersectionality, like the particular racial and ethnic demographic, but immigrants. Like, I'm an immigrant, I wasn't born here. Luckily I came here through documented status, but that makes me no better or less than someone that didn't, and no better or less in terms of the contributions I can make to entrepreneurship. So Liz, same question for all the panelists. Let's do a brief intro so we can dive into the meat of the conversation. But, how is your work advancing equity and inclusion?
I guess to be brief about it, which is something very difficult for me to do usually, since I'm a talker, but I've already added a bunch of time with that and this. So my work has been recently working with accelerators. So I previously had a software company, and I had to do that because no one would hire me even after having 2 master's degrees. Couldn't find a decent job within the tech and innovation ecosystem. So I started my own thing. Now I consult and work with accelerator programs. I previously was managing director at Backstage Capital's office in Philly. And right now I work with Launch Lane through the Science Center. And I'm pretty connected to the people in CIC in Philly, and want to go down to Miami for for those of you who are in Miami. I do want to go down there when this clears up. But I pretty much I try to shine a light on other people that are in similar situations to the one that I was in. I think it's really important.
Love that. A dear friend, Brian Burkeen, who is with Lightship Capital, says folks, particularly Black founders, are over-mentored and under-invested in. And you can have all the capacity in the world, and you continually have to prove up your value, which you've probably done for the rest of your life by the time you're at the point where you are launching your venture. And so I think that's so important that, pay people what they're worth, invest in people. Don't just let implicit bias shift the way that you spend your dollars. I love that. Temante, heading over to you. How does your work advance equity and inclusion?
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for having me. As a co-founder of Black Men Talk Tech, we're an entrepreneurship collective that we promote collaboration between Black men and other members of the tech ecosystem. We do this through an annual conference, usually held in Miami. We're gonna have to pivot, obviously, due to COVID-19, it looks like, but also through community partnerships, helping to provide access to funding and capital and resources for Black male founders and entrepreneurs to grow and scale their ventures. We know that statistically, when it comes to, capital, venture capital, especially when it comes to, Black male-led ventures or just minority ventures in general, the statistics are abysmal. And so at the end of the day, we're trying to bring more folks that look like myself to the table to be able to, and obviously, inclusion is a big part of what we're doing. So, a lot of times I find myself when I go to, different tech conferences and the like, I'm the only one, that looks like me. So we wanted to have a safe space for those, again, that look like myself to be able to learn from, subject matter experts, and also bring in people who actually, generally want to help, founder-friendly investors, for example, people who want to partner and actually, collaborate on our mission. So, I, got my inspiration from Black Women Talk Tech and, seeing what they were doing. Happened to go to school with one of their co-founders, Lauren Washington. We went to Carolina together. And so that was my initial inspiration for even, and just actually seeing the impact that they were having in such a short period of time on Black women. Wanted to have a similar impact, in the same space with Black men, being a tech founder. All of us are tech founders at Black Women Talk Tech and Black Men Talk Tech. So we all know the struggle. We all have our own startups. We've all pitched. We've all been told no 100 times. We're all looking for that one yes. We're all, in it, so we know we can speak to it. And then again, collaboratively, we formed our organizations. So that's my inspiration, and, definitely want to do something that has a long-term focus on these issues, right? Not just a kind of in the moment type deal, right? Which is one of the things that we've been talking about when it comes to Black Lives Matter. It's got to be this isn't a snapshot. So, just continuing to do the work. And, at Black Men Talk Tech, we have an opportunity to do that, as well as Black Women Talk Tech.
Awesome. I think you used one of my favorite words, and I use this in a framework when I talk about how we might elevate from a racial equity perspective innovators, which is this idea of inspiration capital, making sure that the ecosystem actually overrepresents or adequately represents the people who look like you and whose experiences you can actually identify with. Walking in, I used to practice law, walking in to conferences, I'm the only Black lawyer, or walking into a courtroom and I'm mistaken for the court reporter or someone that's not actually representing clients is going to disincentivize me from further engaging and really maximizing my potential in any given space. And I think the same holds true, to your point, Temante, for the innovation ecosystem. I want to go to Caroline for your intro, and then we'll close it out with Faye and then really dive into some of these questions. But, Caroline, talk to us about how your work is advancing equity. And
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. Quite the lineup. I think I'll give some context for my role. So I'm the Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services at Harvard. What does that mean? I serve master's and PhD candidates interested in going on the non-academic market. In addition to that, I'm a faculty instructor at Fisher College, small private in Boston, serving primarily first-gen low-income students. And I'm teaching a class there called Preparation for Life and Career. And the reason that I mention that is because I think what's really core in my work and of my colleagues as well, career development is a social justice issue, right? Like my approach with my students is that you should be taking inventory of your skills and your interests and your values when you think about a career pathway. There is a tremendous amount of privilege in being able to do that. And I really want to sort of fight for an environment, a culture, a space where all students can show up to the table and be aspirational, have the resources available to them. We know that students of color are accessing career services across colleges and universities in our country at significantly lower rates than their white peers. Why is that? And we need to think really critically about how we move the dial on that. I also do a lot of employer relations work, right? So supporting my employers, a lot of them are showing up in these times, right? Saying we really want to hire diverse students. And it's like, okay, but what kind of culture then will our students be entering if they are getting an offer from you? And so I'm really excited to be part of that conversation. I think I'd also be remiss in saying that while I think I'm on the right side of this conversation, I think simply by virtue of my whiteness, I still have a lot to learn, and I'm willing to do that, and I'm excited to learn today as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think it's no surprise that you're at an academic institution and you are an educator, because part and parcel to this conversation around equity is having the humility to educate ourselves and understanding that wherever you sit, whatever your skin color, your experience, like there's still room to grow. I have room to grow. There's so many intersectionality issues that I am not conversant in, that I'm not familiar with. And so I think the takeaway with your work is really, how do you educate yourself and others to create more opportunities? And that culture piece is real, as we just talked about. Like if you are going into an institution where you're not set up for success, like a lot of corporate America is, it becomes then very challenging. Faye,
yeah,
you ready?
I'm ready.
Over to you. Same question. And how do you work advancing equity and inclusion? And then we'll dive into a couple questions for the rest of the time frame.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me this evening. Really excited to be on this fantastic panel. So I serve as president of Forward Cities. We are an organization that helps communities around the country build more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems. And we are at this very unique sweet spot, which I really love. And that is ecosystem building as this emerging field wrapped around how do you create the culture and environment in which entrepreneurs can thrive and grow, and equity. And so being able to take those two things and ensure that as communities are growing entrepreneurial ecosystems, they're doing it in a way that has D&I baked into the DNA. And that's our sweet spot. And I like to think about it actually in terms of the way Leanne described it, this idea of, it's been said it's not a marathon, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So my dad was a track coach. And I was slow as a turtle, so I did not run track, but I sat all the time for years watching him coach track and watching kids run. And the way I like to think about equity work is actually, it's not a marathon, it is not a sprint, it's actually hurdles. And the reason why is that hurdles, actually, you have to be intentional. You can't just take off and run from the beginning to the end. You have to be thinking along the way and preparing yourself for each next milestone, each next hump that you have to get over. And you have to be intentional about the timing. They have to think about how many strides, they have to think about how much time it's going to take, how high they have to jump, they have to put their bodies through the conditioning to actually make that muscle memory. It doesn't happen automatically. So when I think about equity work, I really think about that it is about hurdles and intentionality. And so that's the work that Forward Cities does. We actually work in communities around the country, and we go in and we know the communities want to be more equitable, but they don't know how. And in my early career, I wanted it to happen right now. And it didn't. And I became frustrated and upset because why aren't people listening? Why aren't they seeing Why isn't there change? And that's because they didn't know how. They knew where they wanted to get to, but they needed that support. And so Forward Cities goes in, we place a full-time ecosystem builder on the ground. We help build a local cross-sector council of grassroots and treetops leaders that are diverse and that are representative of the communities that we're really trying to assist. And we make sure that we are discovering through data what those entrepreneurs need, and we help those communities design solutions to address the barriers for underestimated and underrepresented entrepreneurs. And we also hold the grant for the Egypt Communities Program with the Kauffman Foundation. And so we have this very exciting opportunity because that grant is really designed to chart the future of ecosystem building for the nation, to bake D&I and equity into actually the DNA of this entire field as it grows.
Excellent. Thank you, Faye. I'm going to stick with the track analogy and talk a little bit about vision statement. So we're going to do a little bit of work, a little bit of an exercise. When I think about equity, I also think about track and field. I ran track, I was a sprinter. And the interesting thing about the race is the starting blocks are staggered, right? If you've ever been on a track, you know that you're not all starting exactly the same place, that they're staggered to make sure that you end up at the same place, right? And so I think what we've realized in this moment is that the starting blocks are staggered. We see disparities in kind of COVID treatment, COVID care, who we define as an essential worker, the reality of liquid asset poverty that is really pronounced around Black and Latino communities, zip code level distinctions and access to opportunity. And so, you know, as we think about staggered starting blocks and getting to the same end result, what's your vision statement for an equitable future in the US? Not that I'm going to give you an easy question, but the question is, what is your vision statement for an equitable future? So it's not a dissertation, but if you had to succinctly say, this is my vision, what would it be? Faye, we'll start with you.
I can say it in one acronym, and then I will say it just a little bit more, but it's ABIDE. And that's the work, that's the brand that we've given to our DEI for ecosystems work. And it stands for access, belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And typically people are focused on DEI and they miss out on these two crucial pieces that we believe are at the heart of the barrier for underrepresented and underinvested entrepreneurs, and that is access and belonging. So this idea that no matter what kind of programs people offer, if you don't have access to them because of your geography, your language, your age, where you're situated as far as connectivity and the digital divide, then you cannot take advantage of those opportunities and that information. And then the other piece that's typically missing is belonging. And this idea of understanding that it's not enough to say everybody is welcome, but when you come, do you feel like that people prepared the experience for you? And not just that it's colorblind and there is no color, but no, they intentionally thought about what would you specifically want and need and experience, and design that experience or that space or that program for you. And then also understanding that it's okay to have affinity spaces and affinity resources that are equitably funded. And so rather than saying you need to come to us and we need to include you, ecosystems really being okay with and leaning into investing in spaces that are for affinity groups like women, like Black communities, like Hispanic communities, because those leaders know those audiences and have built trust. And so if you can actually invest in those spaces and those opportunities, it will go a lot further than you saying, we want to include you in what we are doing. So,
yeah, I think it's that question is like, who is the table by and who is the table for? And what right do you have to invite people to the table? That's
exactly.
Kind of you know, equity is, you know, creating a seat at the table. And I'm like, whose table is it? So I love the acronym of ABIDE because it helps knock our senses down to thinking about fundamental questions about who even owns the space and to whom does the space belong. And if the space belongs to everybody, then everybody ought to be the ones that are curating what happens in a community. I want to go to Caroline. talk to us. What is your vision statement for an equitable future look like? Tough question, but
I think it's uncovering the secrets of entering, whether it's education or career pathways. Like and that's not a succinct statement or phrase, so to speak, but I find myself so much of what I'm teaching my students are just these things that no one has ever taken the time to let them know about before, and the do's and don'ts. And right, I'm sort of navigating a lot of these spaces, especially when I'm supporting my students who stem from underrepresented backgrounds. Like, they don't have networks that they can just tap into. Their parents don't have networks that they can just tap into like their white counterparts. And so teaching them strategies for accessing those spaces, empowering them, I hope, and letting them know that you have every right to be in that space. Here are some tips and tricks about how you can operate effectively in that space to get ahead. I'm so glad that the course that I teach is required for all students in order to graduate, because it's just like, this is just the stuff that nobody tells you. Let me at least be one voice who can help give you a heads up. And I think when all of our students have access to this intel, or in an ideal world, if those barriers didn't even exist to begin with, right? If we didn't keep these secrets in these white spaces, that I think is where we'll see the dial move for sure.
You know, Caroline, you hit on something that, for people that know me, know this is very close to home. So I work with students that are matriculating to college, so underrepresented students of color, you know, from those backgrounds where they're first generation, low income, and we have 100%, you know, success rate for college matriculation, 90% scholarship rate. But what we've realized over 7 years is that it's a strategic approach, which we often don't address the fact that the biggest institution or system that perpetuates white supremacy or racism is culture. And culture is learned, it's conditioned. And if you haven't had the access to understand, you know, how to position yourself for your college application, or where you should intern, or that you need to call, like, or even have a friend of a friend to let you intern in their startup so that your resume is as decorated as the kid who interned at Ernst & Young because the father or mother called in a favor, then again, that staggering block, you're still going to be one step behind the 8 ball. So I love that vision of demystifying the pathways to real access. Liz, I'm going to go to you. What's your vision statement for an equitable future look like?
Just steal the line from my shirt and say Black CEOs matter. And the reason for me to say that is because what I didn't mention in my intro is actually my background's in urban planning and technology. I got sirens going by, my bad. I can't help that. It's killing me. It's much louder for me than it is for you guys, I think. But for me, I think that one of the biggest issues, something that I recently wrote about on LinkedIn, is the lack of cultural competence. And my undergraduate background's in communication, and a lot of my research has been on like psychology, communication. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that no one's talking about is the lack of cultural competence. People don't know how to talk to us. And it's kind of silly because all they have to do is read a book or have a conversation with someone, a sincere conversation. So that's been one of my biggest frustrations. And I think that one of the things that will fix things like that is by making sure there's more Black and brown people who are starting successful businesses, getting access to venture capital, and helping to impact like long-term impacts on economic multipliers in Black and brown neighborhoods. I mean, it could make such a big difference. And I'll go back to what Faye said about the hurdles. I just was in another conversation maybe like a week ago on another panel, and I said, we don't face a glass ceiling. It's a glass door. It's a glass door. We're walking into them every day, all day when you go into a corporation. And there's no way possible, realistically, for us to climb a corporate ladder if cultural competence doesn't exist in an organization. So I think that we need more Black and brown founders to do our own thing.
Liz, you just dropped some bars right here for us, and I love it. And I think the interesting, one of the takeaways that I have from what you said is this idea of the spaces that we seek to inhabit not being hospitable for us. I think it was Minda Hurt. She writes the memo. She might have tweeted this a couple weeks ago, which said everybody's talking about, the murder of unarmed Black men and women, but the death rate of people's careers in corporate America is exponentially higher than the numbers, the high numbers that we're seeing in the media. I think that a lot of people talk about, oh, it's so great, this Black founder became an entrepreneur, but they don't realize it's entrepreneurship by necessity, because a lot of the spaces are not fertile. They're not fertile ground for entrepreneurs of color. So we have no other choice but to create our own spaces. So I love that.
Failure is not an option for us. It's not an option for everybody. And I think that more people need to think about that when they say stupid things like that. When you say fail and fail again and fail again, it's like not everybody has friends and family rounds that they have access to.
Yep,
Risk means something very different.
Yeah.
That golden parachute does not exist. We don't, I think that I posted on Instagram, if you follow me, I said privilege is nuanced, right? And Cari, I want to go to you. And it's this idea that particularly as people of color, and I know Caroline, you're really, hip to this concept that like, we don't have the privilege to walk away from conversations about race because it makes us uncomfortable, like a lot of other people do. I think that was a post that I reposted. Like, there's so much privilege that's nuanced. So Cari, I want you to share with us your vision statement for an equitable future in the US.
Well, I was just like bowing down to Liz's answer, because when you asked the question, I wrote down here in my little scribbles 3 things, and the first one's a dollar sign. Like, sometimes it seems dirty or nasty or shameful to talk about money because we're doing social work. Like, BS, we need to find, what I see in the future is more money for our communities and more leaders of our communities making the big bucks so that we can reinvest them and have better redistribution. So my vision number 1 is people that look like us with more money. So that was my first thought, whether that's VC money. But then my second little scribble here is something that I love. And my vision really is executive succession, which is what you were saying, that the careers are dying, the people in organizations, the glass ceiling or the glass door. I mean, we are getting the junior entry level jobs. We continue to be managers, but what's happening in the C-suite? Why aren't we getting to the C-suite? And one of, I'll brag, it was after a lot of conversation at GA and a lot of mistakes made, one of the initiatives that is being that's signed off by the executive committee is that every C-suite executive at General Assembly will have one, if not more, successors from underrepresented communities, and they're going to begin a program to get trained for that position. And so that the C-suite no longer just looks like white male or white female. At GA, we have female represented, and we have people from other cultures, but they're still male. And so what does that executive succession look like for companies at Apple, at Google, where the money really is, IBM, at the White House? And so we need to start thinking about getting more people of color into the C-suite. Where's that work? They'll control money. I keep going back to money, and I don't want to avoid that. And my last word is liberation, and that can mean so many things. And I'm gonna define it from my line of work, which is also tech skills of the future. I mean, we know forever that education is the path to freedom, and so tech is digital economy. It's where it's going. And so, Caroline, I love everything that you've said as well, because if we can just incentivize our communities, that we just teach them a confidence that they can be part of the tech community of digital skills, of the future of building products, then that experience that Faye was talking about will be built for us because it's being built by us. So liberation's where I'll stop.
So what what comes up for me, especially in honor of Jamaican independence today, as a Jamaican, is Bob Marley's line, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, right? We as people of color, particularly immigrants or children of immigrants, have been socialized into a mental slavery around a scarcity mindset. So that's taught us that we can't ask for what we're worth. It's taught us that we probably don't deserve the money that everybody else has. And it's also taught us that we should be streamlined into essential positions rather than in positions that are creating wealth, that are creating companies. And technology, to your point, Cari, provides that liberation and that freedom for us to build our own things or build things for everyone. Because I think the predisposition of a person in an underrepresented role is not to build for a society that's not equitable. Like, we have to build for more people because that's where our lens is calibrated. Temante, I want to come to you. Talk to us before we shift gears a little bit, some more deep dive questions, because you know I'm coming for all of us today, about what your vision is for an equitable future. What's your vision statement?
Yeah, I was thinking about what everybody said, and just when you first asked, and that's not an easy question, but I would say where D&I is truly at the core of politics, education, and business, and it has to be at the core of those three broad focus areas, in my opinion, for it to be truly equitable. Like Faye mentioned earlier, actually, ingraining it into the DNA, into the fabric of those industries and every business affiliated, under those industries and the culture. That's a big ask, but it starts with being the change that you want to see, and being the difference, and less talk and more action. And that's one of my favorite hashtags, and really just finally that accountability, not just having it at the core of everything that you do and ingrained in your culture, but actually holding you accountable, because you can preach and you can talk about it, but what are you doing? What have you done? What is your track record? And having those measurables, ways to ways to measure and hold people accountable. That's what it is for me. Yeah.
So don't talk about it, but be about it. And that idea of that accountability framework. And I want to use your last statement as a jumping off point for the next part of the conversation, which is really how. So I think you start with the why. So that's the vision. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why does this stuff matter? But then I think you get to the what eventually, but the what can shift and change. But I would love to hear, based on your experiences, based off of the work that you do, based on you as people being amazing, most of you I know, is what are your top 3 key ingredients for how we build inclusive environments for innovators and entrepreneurs that identify as a racial and ethnic group? How? Top 3, how takeaways, ingredients. Let's start with you, Caroline.
Sure. So for me, in my space, it's number 1, taking inventory of who are our employer partners. I think all colleges and universities need to take a hard look at who are your partners? What are your pipelines for students? And are we sending our students to employers who care about these things in the ways that they should? 2, it's listening to students' needs. Some of my colleagues got to sit down with the Black Student Association at Harvard just last week, and I guess some of my colleagues had talked about a firmer commitment to, more diversity on our panels and things like that. And the students are like, that's great, and we appreciate that, but we want to talk to the white people in the C-suite because we want them to see us. So we don't just want to go to program, right? So it's again, I think it's listening to students and how can we break down barriers based on their needs and their perceptions. And thirdly, I think it's more creative experiences for students that prepare them for pathways in innovation and entrepreneurship. COVID has been many horrible things, but I do think that it has brought about some really innovative ways of preparing students for careers. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard of, or CIC or even offers virtual experiential learning platforms that are free, that can be accessed from students across the world. So for the student who can't show up to that traditional internship, or their internship got canceled because of COVID, or they aren't even potentially enrolled in a degree program at the time, employers will literally create these simulations so that students can test the waters of different fields that they hadn't considered before, letting that be enough on a resume to say, this is the experience that I've gathered. So that's just a small example of how I think folks can think creatively about, maybe we want to limit the level of education that we're constantly asking for positions. Give students a break. And even at Harvard, it's like, we prefer Harvard experience before you work here. It's like, well, that's tough, right? And you're limiting your candidate pool when you do things like that. So taking inventory of employer partners, listening to what our students need, and thinking creatively about professional development experiences that are equitable for students that haven't had access historically.
I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is listening, I'm not on social media that much, but I'm going to reference it because I think that it makes it clear. So, there's a friend that has a shirt that says "Trust Black Women." Like, that's a shirt that she wears. It's a hashtag. But to me, that extrapolates to the concept, like, why not trust those who you're trying to benefit to tell you what they need? Because I think oftentimes when we're building, inclusive environments, it's too much top down. Like, it's very paternalistic. And I think people don't realize how much of a vestige of supremacy and oppression paternalism is, which is saying, I know what you want, so just do this thing, without this idea of the lived experience and giving value and credence to the data of the lived experience. So Caroline, I love, love, love those points. Want to go to you, Temante. What are the top 3 tactics for building an inclusive environment for racially and ethnically diverse innovators?
I would say alliances with quality, like real mentors that have similar backgrounds and experiences with the people that they're mentoring. Definitely, I would say, secondly, career and education pathways, for sure. And third, I was actually thinking about third. I would say would probably be just, when it comes to people with, like, just in leadership positions, just as a principal, like, truly leading with empathy. That's one of the things that, I do work with Microsoft as well. It's one of the things that our CEO, Satya Nadella, really preaches. And he obviously is one of the best leaders. But, I was listening to what Caroline was saying, and I'm also in education, Caroline. I'm an adjunct professor at Miami-Dade College. I've been there since 2014. I teach in the School of Business. And I actually have a class online that starts in 17 minutes, but my students are going to have to wait a little bit. I teach online with American National University and their paralegal studies program. That being said, and me also being a JD MBA, having a JD like Leanne, definitely I love education, and I'm in education. I'm a professor, and the value of education is undeniable. But I do like what I've been seeing at Microsoft, for example, 150,000 or 150,000 person org. They are removing a lot of the education requirements, the formal education requirements, as you mentioned, Caroline, for a lot of these positions at Microsoft, which is, a great company to work for. Now, of course, some positions are going to require it. But the fact that that they have made a conscious effort to do that and open up so many opportunities is an example of my third point of leading with empathy. So that would be my 3, Leanne.
When we launched our racial equity innovation initiative, Temante, you know this, there were 4 pillars, right? It was educate, empower, empathize, and experiment. And I think that empathy piece is what allows us to create the resonance of emotional connectivity with people who are otherized, so that you can begin to see a piece of yourself. And that literally shifts the way your brain processes input and information. It's one of the key elements of bias disruption. If you study the field of psychology and you know about implicit bias, like a bias disruptor is reframing. And a way to reframe is, thank you, Dwight, for putting it right there in the chat. He's always on it. But a way to reframe is empathy. So who do I want to go to next? Liz, you're shaking your head. Give us your top 3 tactics.
I wanted to think of something that started with the same letter. So, so it's memorable. I got awareness, access, and accountability. And awareness, because there are a lot of people who say they're trying to reach out to more diverse candidates, to be more inclusive in their process, but they're really not. Then people need to work a lot more on sharing these opportunities out. And we need to also make these opportunities accessible. We need access to capital. We need access to professional development, continued education, jobs that provide those things. And accountability is the biggest one, because I'm tired of all these companies getting away. I must not say choice words. I'm tired of all these people getting away with things. I mean, I'm doing my normal venture cafe thing. I got one drink here. I don't have 3 tickets. I got 1 tonight, but 1 is enough already to get me loose. I'm just tired of people not taking accountability when they're supposed to be a leader. If you're in a leadership role, you should be culturally competent. You should be held responsible for the things that you hold your team responsible for under human resources. I think it's very unfair that C-level people get away with these things. And I'm tired of people asking lower junior staff to step up and do DEI work without paying for it. And also expecting someone with 2 master's degrees to come in as an apprentice or an intern, when you know damn well people like us are more skilled and educated than the person that they're probably going to be working under. So I just want to see more accountability. That's the big one.
So it's interesting. I can't tell you how many calls I got for people that are like, hey, can you do this thing, join this organization, and I want to put you in charge of diversity, or you're so good at inclusion, so how about you lead it? It is not the responsibility of the oppressed to fix the challenges of the oppressor. I'm going to say that right there. Feel free to drop it in the chat, because I think the reality is we didn't create this mess. Now we will be helpful. But the first step, usually you think about truth and reconciliation, you got to reconcile the truth of your own complicit role in perpetuating systems that oppress folks of color or folks from underrepresented positions. And so part of this is really about, we use the RACI method in our team: responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. I think RACI applies to organizations as it comes to your point, Liz, around cultural competence and values. As a CEO, you are ultimately accountable, but you're also need to be the R in setting the culture and values of the organization. And I think that too often, I know, I love a good RACI chart. Too often we are asking the wrong people to solve the problems, and also not trying to pay them for their expertise.
Exactly.
Which is another little snippet.
It's not helpful. And it's frustrating because people don't realize that, first, people do know this. People in C-level positions have at least bachelor's degrees. They have master's degrees. To tell me that they can't read a damn book is the most frustrating thing for me, especially right now. And I'm tired of the excuses. The lack of accountability is just mind-blowing. That's all I'm gonna say.
Faye, before we go to you, I want to do a special shout out to Sherelle Dorsey and the team at the Plugs TP Insights. She is amazing, part of the Venture Cafe community forever, even though she kind of decided to leave us geographically. But she and her team have been putting that accountability out there in terms of which companies have said, okay, we support Black Lives Matter, but then what actual actions are they putting in place as a way to give power to their solidarity plays? And I think the next level of that is show me your board, show me your spend, show me who's on your C-suite, who is in executive decision-making positions. And that depth of accountability is what you're talking about, Liz. Faye, let's go to you. Top 3 tactics.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say we got Sherrill in North Carolina, so we can claim her now. So I would love to dig into something that Liz and Leanne talked about first. Talk about this idea that we have a big risk right now. There's a lot of people talking a lot of stuff about racial equity right now, and I like to say this term, fakequity. We are at risk of fakequity right now because that really is people who will say they're going to do this, this, and this. They claim they are equitable, but how they show up in communities and how they show up ain't so. And so for when I think about this, I think about this idea from an ecosystem perspective. So you guys are all coming at it from a lens of companies. I come at it from a lens of the organizations that serve companies and entrepreneurs. And what happens in that funding world is the money goes to the institutional organizations that have the big track record, already have all the big staffs and the budget, and the money does not go to the grassroots organizations who already serve these communities and have trust and have the relationships and have the cultural competence to do it well. And so what will happen is those institutional partners will get the money, and then because they don't know how to do it, they'll pass it through just in drips to those little grassroots folks or ask them to do it for free. And so that is huge in ecosystems around the country. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change. And so the three things I would say is all our ecosystem work is done from a human-centered perspective. And so this idea of discover, design, and deliver. So always be discovering, always be listening to the people that you are trying to serve and having active conversation with them to understand who they are, to empathize with their needs. Design your organization, your offerings, your programs to serve entrepreneurs and companies based on what you learn. So your board better not be all white if you're talking about your equitable. Your staff better not be all white. It does not work. So design everything that you do to achieve that goal. And then also, after you design it, delivering it in a way that actually allows for access and is accessible for folks and ensures that everyone has a seat at the table. And it's the table that you set and is set by the people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think that it's that idea that expertise lives in communities and people that serve at the community level, right? Mm-hmm. That's the real expertise. And I think that the question of access is not only in terms of individuals, but to your point, Faye, the organizations that are doing the work, how might we ensure that they are adequately funded and have access to continue to do their work at scale? That's a question that my team at Venture Cafe Miami and I are really digging deep in right now, is like, how might we better empower each of you? Because that's our role, is how might we help design a framework and infrastructure and then say, well, to do this in implementation, you need to call forward cities. Or if you really want to make sure the technology training is accessible, you need to call Cari at General Assembly. If you want to authentically convene, Black men and women, don't ask me to do it, but let me loop in Temante and, Black Girl Ventures and Black Women Talk Tech. So I think there's an opportunity for thinking about what reciprocal exchange of partnerships looks like, to your point, where it's not just everybody trying to do the same thing, but understanding where you can plug and play and amplify. Cari, I don't know, we've been talking so long, I don't even know if we got to you with the top 3 tactics, so I'm gonna push the ball back to you just in case we didn't.
I got it. Nope. I'm following Liz's model of the letter, and you have it at Venture Cafe too, so I'm gonna stick with the letter C. Collaboration, communication, and challenger. And what I mean by those 3 words are the following. I always see I mean, a strategy for chaos is dividing, right? We're divided into queer, into Black, into Latinx, into disabilities, and then in the Latinx communities, the Afros, the Latin Americans, the Spaniards, we're already minorities. We need to understand how to work together as communities of underrepresented backgrounds. I don't see that often. Maybe it's my own experience, but one of the things that I really admire from the Black community is how your entertainment leaders are investing in tech. It does not happen in the Latinx community. They have money, they could become VCs, they just don't have the education to do it. And so what's happening there? Who's doing the work there? And I'm sure we could learn so much from you guys and how in the process, and obviously civil rights and immigration, and it doesn't need somebody's death or kids in cages or not somebody like, you know, George Floyd not being able to breathe for us to be in solidarity with you. We are already in this together. I don't know if we actually work together to get bigger numbers, to get bigger weight behind policy. So one, collaboration in that sense. Number two, communication. I see an inequality and a break and just absence of communication channels for our communities. Like, this is wonderful and I love talking to us, but how the hell are we getting to the people that really need it? Like, the resources that we have, there is just like such a barrier. And it's weird because obviously digital and Facebook and social media has allowed us to penetrate that that communication barrier, but I don't know if we're really doing it. And I think it has to do with something that Faye had said, which is language and experience, rather than like, does the actual physical social media channel work? Are you actually posting on a content calendar, right? So I think we need to rethink communication. And finally, being the challenger and moving from leadership to challenging to being the challenger. And what I mean by that is Techqueria recently took the stance towards ICE, and we no longer take partnerships, sponsorships, or money from GitHub, from Amazon, from Google, from Salesforce. And that's a big undertake, and that's a big statement. Like, these are the biggest companies in tech, and we are saying we're no longer partnering with you. Obviously, some of our members work there, but we are not going to support you. Why? Because they have contracts with ICE. They literally power ICE. They take ICE's money, and ICE is obviously deporting some of our members. And I wish that the next step to confront equity would be that some of our companies, some of our organizations would be brave enough to be that challenger and say, I will no longer work with you, if Salesforce, if it is that they don't have these policies in place. I'm sorry to pick on Salesforce. I use them at General Assembly, but how can we feel comfortable enough to be that challenger, not just a leader in organizing our communities, and feel like we're not being harassed or we're not being attacked or that you might lose your job. So moving from leadership to challenging, what does that look like?
So much to unpack there, and we only have like a minute or two left, but I think what stands out to me is the alignment. My background before law was in international development, and one of the things that we studied is the impact, the lasting generational impact of colonization. And one of the biggest tactics of kind of the colonial mindset was divide and conquer, right? It was always hone in, elevate, and then create hierarchy around difference rather than thinking about alignment and collaboration, to your point, Cari, because when we collaborate, then we become an unstoppable, unmovable force. But when we allow us to be divided so that we might be conquered, then nobody wins. Like, well, I mean, we at least don't win, right? So I love it. How to combat this divide and conquer mentality is really thinking about collaboration. Since we started like 1 minute off, I'm going to let us do a rapid close up. And I want you to summarize kind of your main takeaway from this conversation in a tweet-sized statement, not the new tweet, but the old tweet, about 140 characters, but I'm not going to be counting. Give us a tweet-size takeaway that we can hashtag. That Dwight, I know you're here. Catch all of these. Make sure to hashtag them on social media, on Venture Cafe's channels. So starting with you, Cari, what is your tweet takeaway?
Let's move from being leaders in equity to being challengers of equity.
Challenge the status quo. Caroline, how about to you? Tweet takeaway.
I would say without actionable work, the good intentions of D&I mean absolutely nothing.
Road to hell is paved with good intentions. I love it. Faye, how about you?
Let's move from fakequity to equity together.
I'm going to use that term, fakequity, like for real, for real. That is my takeaway for the week. Temante, to you.
Posted it earlier in honor of the great late Representative John Lewis. I'm going to stay in good and necessary trouble. And I think that we all need to do good trouble.
I love it. And if you guys know me, so you know I'm not afraid of a little good trouble here and there. And Liz, let's round it out with you.
We got work to do.
Yeah.
I was going to keep it simple.
And I think on a high note, as we close this up, I'm thinking about my favorite drunken karaoke song, Don't Stop Believing. That's my takeaway. Don't stop believing in the power of innovation, because it truly is a process designed to improve the human condition. So guys, we have a sketch artist who's listening in and grabbing key takeaways, who's going to share out a graphic for this event. We are in Remo, and Venture Cafe's way of doing things is connection. So some of the panelists will be here, hopefully sticking around in Remo to chat at the tables. Feel free to jump from table to table the same way you do in the cafe space. Get your drink number 2. I'm drinking tea, but maybe I might join you, Liz, with another drink. And let's stop the fakequity and actually turn to action. Thank you so much. Christina, I'm going to let you close out presenter view so we can all keep the conversation going. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Leanne.